Hello and welcome to Root Causes, the PKI and Security podcast where a pair of industry veterans talk about all matters digital certificates and PKI. I'm Tim Callan, Chief Experience Officer at Sectigo, and I'm here with Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow at Sectigo. So, Jay, one of the things that I know you want to talk about today is there have been some recent implementation problems with FIDO2.
Yeah, so we can get into the details. I want to jump right into what the issue is, because I think that's what's interesting on this podcast to this audience. So FIDO2, WebAuthn, passkeys.
Yep.
And depending on where you are in the technology ecosystem, you might call it something different.
Okay.
But it is based off of asymmetric secrets, key pairs, and very solid ideas in tech. I'm going to give, this is why I wanted to open the podcast with the idea that this is no indictment against FIDO2 and all of its standards at all. However, the problem always comes down to implementation.
Okay.
So first of all, as you know, WebAuthn, it requires a per application implementation.
Yes.
And otherwise you'd see it everywhere.
Sure.
Right? Yep. It would probably just take over the world. And thank goodness for that, because you and I always talk about the problems with passwords and multi-factor authentication. Well, why not use something like this? Yeah. And I think in business to consumer level applications, perfect. Because it's on my iPhone, it's on your Android, it's all over the place, right? It's become fairly ubiquitous recently because of the big technology vendors who have chosen to enable people to implement it. But let's talk about a specific problem.
Okay.
Single sign-on technology. So in other words, you authenticate with FIDO2, and FIDO2 doesn't care what you're logging into. Like the standard, the protocol, the key pairs, they don't care what you're logging into. You have to care very deeply about what you're logging into. And maybe what you're logging into is an environment that uses single sign-on. So all of a sudden, that really rich and well thought out asymmetric authentication, asymmetric secret-based authentication is now hinging all of its hopes and trusts and dreams onto a symmetric secret, a session token.
Okay.
So some of these implementation problems that you just mentioned are allowing the session token to be reused in different places by different people, including bad guys who have potentially done a man-in-the-middle attack. And so I think what white hats are pointing out right now is that, oh my goodness, it is so easy to not be careful about the session token in your implementation. Now, here's the problem. Is the problem FIDO2? Is the problem Microsoft or Apple or Google, who are, have the underlying, yes, we know how to talk WebAuthn? Well, if you and I were to interview all of them simultaneously, they'd all say, no, my stuff works.
Right.
So where's the problem? The problem is that session token for single sign-on scenarios is just floating around with nobody taking ownership of the context of how that session token is being used or how it could potentially not be secure at all in the implementation. And so it's a bad scenario for FIDO in the sense that FIDO didn't make any mistakes.
Yeah.
But they're relying on the implementation with the single sign-on session token to be handled correctly. Why isn't it easy to handle correctly?
Right.
Well, for a while there was the idea of session token binding. I may get this wrong, but I think Chrome right now might be the only browser that supports it, or it might be Edge. It doesn't really matter. I think only one of the browsers even supports that concept, and almost nobody implements it. And it's because of the technical difficulty in actually implementing it. So there's the problem, Tim. If it's not if the browsing world is fragmented on offering a mitigation, then it's going to be real difficult to be able to say, hey, 100% of my customers who are logging in with SSO are, that session is protected well. And even if I can somehow get all the browsers to enable the token binding, then it's still difficult to implement. Nobody ever made it easy. And so we're in this really difficult situation where FIDO2 put out great protocol for authentication. It's based on an asymmetric secret. Hallelujah, we've gotten rid of passwords.
Okay, right.
We've now got the buy-in from the big tech vendors who all say, you can enable it, build your app around it, go for it. Fantastic. But then all of a sudden, the whole thing is hinging on a symmetric SSO token that is not easily protected, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds to me, when you start saying like, well, whose fault is it? It's really the fault of the architecture. It's the fault of the strategy. And that's tough because those are hard ones to fix. What do we do?
If this was some incredibly esoteric thing, we wouldn't even be podcasting about it because whatever. But to me, FIDO2 and WebAuthn and all the tech vendors is like, this is
major.
It's a great option for passwordless, especially scalable B2C passwordless.
Yeah.
That's like the holy grail of what we need right now. In the enterprise, we're going to need other more flexible solutions that might involve certificates, authentication, etc. Terrific. But for B2C, you need something fast, low latency, supported by all the big tech vendors. You need that whole ecosystem, and it's there. But here's the last missing piece. And I guess my only point to this is I hope it gets solved.
Okay.
And I think I'd like to re-examine whether or not token binding is not a bad idea, and can we make it easier for people to implement into their applications? Or is there another idea out there? Here's the call to arms. Folks, let's make it happen.
Okay.
Let's protect that session token because I really want FIDO2 to succeed.
FIDO2 is definitely a good thing unless it's giving the bad guys the keys, in which case it's not a good thing, right? So yeah, that's got to get solved.
That's right, Tim. So there it is. And also, it's also a brief lesson on you can be utilizing asymmetric secrets and be very proud of yourself for using. Remember, you and I always talk about putting stronger locks on the doors.
Yeah.
Well, if your strong lock on the door sits on top of a very, very weak mechanism, then it's not good.
It doesn't really get you anywhere. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So there it is, Tim. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Jay. This has been Root Causes.